with that settled, let's dive into our lecture. So, as I was putting this course together, I was trying to get some feedback from some of my colleagues who are in the electricity power sector, and I got a couple suggestions that one of the things that would be really useful to do is to think about ways that the grid has evolved really quickly in response to what we call these sort of game changer events. And so today, the main thing we're going to talk about we're going to kind of look at case studies of a couple of these things, and then get some perspective on how the grid adapted and changed to try and ensure that the problems that arose from some of these events didn't happen again. So, I think almost all of these are things that you guys will all have probably heard of or even experienced yourselves. Three Mile Island. Okay, this one none of you guys experienced yourselves, but this is an incident that happened back in the late 1970s. Who's heard of 3 Mile Island? At least, yeah. So this is a nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania. So along this river, it's the Susquehanna River. There is this kind of island here that I guess is 3 miles long. I guess that's why it's called that. And they had, or I guess still have, a nuclear power plant kind of located there. Any reason why we might put the nuclear power plant here? Yeah, the water access, right? And so that's exactly right. So we use the water from the river to help cool down the water that's used in the Rankine cycle for boiling, so for sending boiling water through the turbine. Okay, so 3 Mile Island is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor. It's got almost 1.7 gigawatts of capacity. The 2 units were deployed and installed back in the 1970s. This unit is located, so the geography in Pennsylvania, so it's part of PJM, although at the time it was a power pool, not a formalized wholesale market at the time. This is prior to the deregulation that happened in the 1990s. And the power plant was operated right by this Metropolitan Edison company. Okay, so on March 28th of 1979, an incident occurred. So there was a pressure release valve that got stuck open. And as a result of that, you had a loss of coolant in your reactor. The operators misinterpreted some of what was being shown in the control room, and so they actually ended up trying to decrease cooling flow when it should have been increased. So you have kind of 2 compounding errors that had happened. And because of this, you have essentially this fuel damage that's heating up and occurring over several hours. The temperature of the reactor core will just continue to increase, right? You've got this, you've got nuclear fission reactions happening in the absence or in much lower quantities of coolant. And so the core itself ended up essentially melting fortunately, right, so the reactor core is contained within this containment building, which remained intact, which is good because that shielded kind of everything outside of it from radiation. So this is kind of the physical thing that happened in 3 Mile Island incident that would kind of destroy that reactor.
That's really interesting. They were like, let's shut or like let's reduce cooling. Wouldn't you think the answer, like in doubt, like what would be the safety issue that they would be like, oh, we need to reduce cooling? Like it seems like it would produce less power, but is there a safety issue there?
Is there some critical minimum?
I think it's more operators just following a particular protocol and misinterpreting the signals. You probably want to have some kind of like temperature balance, right? And so, yeah, I don't think it would be totally unreasonable to be kind of adjusting coolant pressure up and down. But yeah, I wasn't there. I don't know exactly, why. Okay, so a lot of media coverage, lots of conflicting expert statements. And 3 Mile Island also occurred during the Cold War and also kind of at the start of the environmental movement. So at the time in the late 1970s, there is, in general, this sort of larger debate on nuclear sort of proliferation. I think there, to some extent, even continues to be some kind of conflation between like nuclear armaments and nuclear power. And even though there isn't a lot of radiological impact, which is the thing that you would probably worry the most from a like environmental perspective and safety perspective, it was the most sort of widely publicized U.S. nuclear accident. And so kind of as a direct result of this, there was a very rapid decline in nuclear construction. So if you guys remember, and I'll show this chart again in a couple slides, there's the build out of different, there's a build out of different nuclear reactors happening over the sort of couple decade time period, and 3 Mile Island really kind of cut this off. Many reactors that were in the process of construction were paused or canceled within a few months of this incident. So from an investment standpoint, people didn't want to invest in this technology, and there was basically no public trust in nuclear power. And then the utilities themselves had to have very expensive cleanup costs, right, on the order of money that would rival sort of building entirely new plants. So 3 Mile Island led directly to the creation of the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations. This is to help the industry develop like a stronger safety culture. They help to establish standardized operating training and performance benchmarks. And it was a very influential regulatory body in the industry. And I would say even to some extent outside of nuclear power, to some degree, we often think of the level of risk reduction and safety standards in nuclear as kind of like the gold standard for operations, and so that does trickle down to some extent to other facilities, even if it's not nuclear. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission underwent a couple of reforms. So instead of compliance-based oversight, there were more risk-informed regulation, and so there are specific rules about tolerance to different risks. Required licensing and qualifications for simulators working in nuclear power plants. They mandated improvements in instrumentation, alarms, and ergonomics to prevent, right, the sort of signal error that the operators were faced with at 3 Mile Island. And then had a bunch of emergency preparation requirements. So all of this really kind of raised the standard in the nuclear industry and how we sort of practice operations in general.
Was the NRC around at the time of 3 Mile Island?
Yes, yeah. So INPO didn't exist. It was formed in response, but the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, was already there. Yeah, so here in the late 1970s, you have nuclear in the red. And so for some period of time, there was a decent sort of decrease in capacity of additions. Although I guess it picked up back in the 1980s, in the later 1980s. A lot of that build out was stuff that was already slated in construction. I guess no new reactors for more than 30 years after TMI. Yeah, and then big shift in safety culture, not just in nuclear, but in a lot of other operations in general. Probabilistic risk assessments. The foundation for a lot of this stuff arose out of 3 Mile Island. Actually, the grad school that I went to, they do a lot of like risk assessment stuff, so we had to learn a lot about this type of thing and the evolution of it, and how you do sort of risk assessment over time. And 3 Mile Island was always the kind of like classic case study for like compounding failures and how you can mitigate risk. Yes.
So before, just to make sure I understand, before 3 Mile Island, there was like strict rules that past which if you broke the rule, there was no licensing happening, but before you broke the rule, it was all good.
Wait, what do you mean with the licensing?
I'm trying to interpret the shift from strict compliance to risk-based regulation.
Yes. So you have to comply with certain sets of rules. The risk piece of it is that they now consider like probabilistic risk as part of the sort of evaluation process, as opposed to having strict rules about everything. And that lets you be more flexible about incidents that just happen sort of probabilistically, right? So this might be something that you overlook because from a compliance standpoint, if a risk is low enough, you kind of just get to ignore it, right? But if there's like a 1% risk versus 5% risk, and how that can trickle down to other, like if you have things that like compound in failures, and you miss that in the compliance piece, this is a way that you can maybe more flexibly address that.
Okay. Huh.
So 3 Mile Island is considered kind of one of the big three in terms of nuclear disaster incidents. The other two being Chernobyl and Fukushima. Yeah, exactly. So those are more sort of international, but certainly these all have had pretty big impacts in the sort of broader use of nuclear energy internationally. And certainly these things played a role to maybe even reinforce some of the pushback against this technology, even in the U.S., even though these things didn't happen in our country. But yeah, these are very salient, right? I could ask you guys about this, and you guys already kind of know the answer. But the response to these events, yeah, similar in many ways to what had happened in the U.S. So as I was putting this together, I did find out, kind of surprisingly, does anyone know about this new thing that's happening with 3 Mile Island?
Yeah, Microsoft audit and stuff.
Yeah. So it's going to, they're reopening and restarting the nuclear plant, and it's going to power, some Microsoft data centers apparently. So yeah, we are, I guess, back in business with a new, or I should say new old nuclear power plant.
Are they gonna stick the data center in the river too?
I have no idea.
Put it in space.
Yeah, to put it in space.
I really hope we don't put it in the river. I don't think we have much regulation for data centers at the moment.
There's TMDLs for temperature. Total maximum payload.
Yeah. So there isn't. There are environmental regulations in general for using resources like rivers as resources. So the one you're referring to is about how much like heat you can dump into like a river source, right?
It may only be during spawning runs, or if there's a species there all year long.
Yeah.
The plant's already online if there's steam coming up? Why is it?
Oh. Yeah, actually, I'm not sure. Well, it's a 2-unit thing. I know one of the units is definitely out of commission. Does anyone know, did they shut down TMI2 after this incident? I assume the whole thing was shut down.
It looked like TMI 1 was open until 2015.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
That was just like real quick.
Huh. So maybe, they just let the other one continue to operate. I actually didn't know that. Yeah.
Kind of wild.
If it ain't broke.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like if you just shut both of them down, then you're just really crippling your grid's ability.
Yeah, I mean, it is a lot of power, right? You're talking about, what was it was 1,700 gigawatts. So you're losing about 850 on one unit of like 90+% capacity factor. That is a substantial amount of electricity generation. So, anyways, we expect. I don't know what to expect with this administration, but it's planned to be reopened.
Who knows if they'll still have funding in a year?
Okay, the next big game changer, Enron. Who was around in California when this happened? Yeah. Okay. Who like actually remembered the blackouts or brownouts? I grew up in San Diego, so I definitely remember some of the brownouts that were happening at this time. I don't think it happened to us as frequently as others, but yeah. So major. So I'm gonna kind of talk about the context of this in terms of like what happened with the general populace, and then we'll kind of go through the mechanics of what was going on. So in summer of 2000, we had these sort of major blackout periods, right? So short duration rolling outages on several hot days, and so this is kind of load shedding at its finest, right? You're basically get informed that, hey, you're gonna lose power for a couple hours, and just kind of be prepared for that. And then in the winter of 2000, 2001, we had these sort of really severe outages in January and March for a couple of days. So real-time deficits of 500 to 2,000 megawatts. Basically, a bunch of large generating units ended up going down due to, we'll call it maintenance for now. And then you had huge amounts of congestion at a lot of these critical transmission paths, right? When you take out this much power, and then you rely only on sort of imports, you are going to essentially really clog up the sort of capacity of the transmission lines to get to where the demand needs to happen. So CAISO had these emergency procedures where they're starting to rely on operating reserves and bringing operating reserves online to supply electricity. And as the demand increased and as you had generators coming offline, these would stress out the amount of operating reserves you would have. And once you got to kind of less than 1.5% of operating reserves left, they would order these sort of blackouts to happen in order to not lose and trip the entire system, right? So instead of turning more generators on, you turn demand off. And that will do the same thing to help kind of maintain your frequency, right? So utilities would just shed load in these blocks of a couple hundred megawatts, and you would get, hour to 2 hours of blackouts per block. And at the peak, you had like 500,000 people lose power. Okay, so what was happening at the time that was leading to these sort of issues? So restructuring was kind of in its infancy stage, and so California had partially started to deregulate their market structure, but this created a number of big vulnerabilities. Okay, so remember, in a vertical integration, right, utilities used to own all of the transmission, distribution, all the wires, as well as the generation assets. And so now what's happening is utilities have to divest generation and then buy energy almost entirely through our spot market, right? So remember, how much do we leverage the spot market today? Does anyone remember?
20 to 40%?
Yeah, like 20, 30%-ish. Whereas back then, you'd be more like 80 to 90% purchasing electricity on the spot market. And so all of the benefits that we talked about with hedging, you don't really get. Okay. So without the ability to have these PPAs, right, you have retail rates that are frozen while wholesale prices are not. So the ISOs, so CAISO, for example, right, or the power exchange markets, these guys just were kind of formed and up and running, right? These really only came about post the deregulation. So this created very sort of rigid separation between scheduling day-ahead markets and real-time operations. And utilities had not, at the time, right, they hadn't developed a lot of these sort of long-term PPAs that we kind of rely on now. So when you have all of these factors, there are these supply scarcity issues that happen when you have these rising natural gas prices at the time that was happening, transmission constraints, you have a lot of growing demand, right? The economy is kind of booming at this time. This is like this is the arrival of the internet and all of the sort of economic boom that was happening with that. And then it just so happened during this time period, there was a lot of hydro shortages in the Northwest. So this is kind of our kind of setting for what would end up playing out with Enron. Yeah.
What do you mean by that rigid separation? Like there wasn't communication?
Yeah, so the real-time stuff was not so coordinated with the day-ahead market at the time. And so your response is a lot more, what's the best way to put it? You're like responding more to the like changes in frequencies as opposed to thinking about how you're deviating from the trends of the day-ahead market. So you have like less time to essentially be responsive and it's harder to anticipate like bigger need to like dispatch generators.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, when you said in the first point, like they were forced to buy energy on the day-ahead spot market, losing hedging ability, is it just that in the beginning they didn't have the PPAs?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
The consequences of that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, your deregulation is a very new thing at the time. And so if you're used to just having all of the assets and just being able to control everything, right? The wholesale market, the day-ahead market, and the way that generators are bidding it, that's all like fairly new at this point. And so the risk that we talk about with prices fluctuating, we eventually figure out ways of dealing with that through these PPAs, right?
The mechanism for PPAs even in place at this point?
I think there were PPAs back then, but like very few, and it was probably a more novel sort of instrument to hedge risk. People probably didn't realize the importance of, well, I'm sure there were a couple smart people who knew, right? But in general, that type of stuff just didn't exist as much back then, at least as I understand. Okay, so this Enron scandal. So who was Enron? So this is originally a natural gas pipeline company back in 1985. This dude, Jeff Skilling, he was the CEO and wanted to get into energy trading and financialization of electricity and gas markets. They eventually became the largest energy trading platform in the world And they use this opaque, weird accounting structure called special purpose entities to hide debt. Yeah, and so in 2000, prior to all of this crazy stuff happening, Enron was actually one of the biggest companies in the US. And so what is it that Enron did? So actually, before I get into the sort of actual manipulation tactics, let's think a little bit about what you could do if you were in a wholesale market that operates mainly on spot prices, right? So we're talking about wholesale market, and there isn't any PPAs, right? So prices are going to be a little bit more volatile, especially for many of the reasons that we were mentioning before, like low hydro reserves in the Northwest, transmission congestion, high natural gas prices. If you can somehow manipulate the market in some ways, you could get paid off pretty handsomely, right? Because you could shoot those prices up. In a world where you have a lot of PPAs hedging against things like this, right, the prices would still, you'd be able to remain stable on prices, right, because of the contract promises. But without that, suddenly you run into the potential danger for things like this to happen. And so the context, the historical context was not sort of favorable or let's say the historical context was kind of favorable for gaming to happen. And so they would do these things where they would, it was really interesting kind of reading about all of this stuff. They would have these phone calls with each other on sort of manipulation tactics, and they would use specific keywords to indicate that they were trying to do certain things, right? So Death Star, scheduling fictitious congestion relief to get paid for alleviating congestion that never existed. Ricochet or megawatt laundering is like exporting power out of California and then re-importing it at higher caps to avoid price controls. Fat Boy, this is exaggerating load schedules. Get Shorty, selling ancillary services the company doesn't actually have, and then buying them later to exploit scarcity pricing. And then physical withholding is literally taking plants offline and claiming that they need to undergo maintenance, right? Okay, so rolling blackouts, as I mentioned before, and wholesale market prices, because of a lot of these manipulation tactics, they would essentially drive up the prices to almost 10 times higher than they would be in many intervals, right? And so we think about some of the stable wholesale prices down here in the like $30, $40 range, shooting up as high as $300 a megawatt. And we now know that a lot of the manipulation of the California wholesale market was happening in this sort of time period here. So from January 2000 through June of 2021. So utilities are unable to recover some of their costs because of this. PG&E went bankrupt back in 2001. It wasn't the first time. It wasn't the last time either. SCE was nearly insolvent, and so the actual state of California had to step in and enter into long-term contracts at really high prices, and they ended up actually assuming procurement responsibility for utilities because utilities couldn't afford to actually procure energy because it was so expensive, right? They didn't have the capital.
They were signing basically PPAs on behalf of utilities.
Well, not PPAs, right? Because you know that stuff didn't exist as much. It was more, right, from the wholesale market, from the spot market, right? So now we think about utilities procuring energy mostly from PPAs and then taking what they need from the spot market. But now you think instead, back then, everything you were getting was from the spot market, and you didn't have these locked-in PPAs at these lower prices, right? You were subject to having to just procure all of your energy at these inflated prices. Yeah, so this person over here, Sharon Watkins, was a whistleblower who exposed a lot of the accounting fraud that had happened. They overstated profits, inflated trading volume, and the Enron stock collapsed from $90 to less than $1 within a matter of a couple of weeks, and filed for bankruptcy in December 2001, which is at the time the largest corporate bankruptcy in history, right? They were one of the largest companies, in the US, and basically dissolved to nothing within the span of a couple of weeks after this fraud was exposed. Yeah.
There's actually something interesting that happened last year or the year before. Somebody bought the rights to the Enron the logo and the name, and they made this fake.
I heard about
thing and
this.
got Paris Hilton to advertise it.
Yeah, this was
And
on
they, and they launched a crypto coin.
I think I saw this on.
Yeah, this really happened. Yeah, no,
Yes, I saw this on TikTok. I was like, what the hell am I looking at?
Yeah, that really happened.
Yeah, very, very fascinating.
What is SPE?
That is this thing here, special purpose entities. They were these shell structures that they were using to hide debt, essentially.
So just to better understand how Enron was able to, do all these manipulation tactics and their position in this new restructured kind of economy, were they working closely with the operators, and that's how they were?
Oh, they were one of the takers of the generation assets that were divested by the utilities.
Because they had the financial power to do so.
Yeah. So you think of them as in some ways kind of owner operators of the generators. Yeah. It was bad enough that we sent people to jail. Imagine that. Yeah, back when we still did that. Regulatory response. So market monitoring obviously became a lot more stringent. They had market monitoring units within ISOs, enhanced market mitigation rules. So you have caps on bids, safeguards against scarcity pricing, and must offer requirements. So, right, all of these things, bid caps so that a generator can't be oh, I'm gonna bid an excessive amount and you have to take me, right? Because I've shut off all these other generators. That helps protect against things like scarcity pricing when you have less capacity. And then you have these must offer requirements that no matter what generators, if you're able to, you have to be able to offer capacity and service to the market. And so all of these things will help to mitigate the type of market manipulation that the Enron was doing. FERC Order 2000 existed actually prior to Enron, but was accelerated a lot afterwards, and this was kind of the formation of the modern ISOs and RTOs with much more integrated market oversight. And so, CAISO was in its infancy at the time that Enron happened, but in many other places, right, we want to avoid that kind of market manipulation happening. They abandoned this. So CAISO was redesigned. They abandoned the power exchange structure. I don't actually know too much about how that works. Yeah.
Did this factor in Gray Davis's recall?
Would that? I think Gray Davis was it at that time, or was it later?
I think that was largely responsible for his recall.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, and my history is hazy a little bit. And then that's what led to Schwarzenegger coming in, or was that Brown before? Schwarzenegger, that's right, yeah.
Without Enron.
We would have never gotten our gubernator. Yeah, that's right.
I believe that that was related somehow when he got recalled, and people were unhappy about this whole thing.
Yeah.
I think that purchase, well, you mentioned the California purchase, bunch of power, I don't know.
Yeah. When the state of California had to step in to procure power, that's pretty intense that would need to happen, right? Yeah. They integrated the day-ahead and real-time markets, and then that eventually adopted LMPs, right, which we now think of as these strong economic signals to help deal and think about with congestion, right, which is one of the things that can help prevent this type of market manipulation in the future. Yeah.
When a generator participates in a PPA, does that prevent them from participating in the spot market as well?
Depends on the terms of the PPA and depends on how much that. Depends on the structure of the PPA. You may be able to offer some amount of your capacity if the contract allows it. So it doesn't.
It seems like the PPAs would mostly work if most of your capacity is guaranteed and unable to participate or not participate based on the spot market. I guess I'm
Well,
a
so
little confused of how the PPAs interact with or don't interact with the spot market to guarantee power.
So the market itself, right, operates in a specific way, independent of the PPAs, to make sure the power plants are joining economically and getting dispatched economically. Yep. The PPAs offer essentially price protection against volatility in the market prices. And so the protection is more about hedging against price spikes, which would have prevented this from happening, right?
So it would have prevented you from being able to make too much of a profit.
Yeah. Well, you basically wouldn't be able to, it would have been no different from the perspective of the owner of the generator, that the prices were so high. They'd have to pay that back, essentially. So today, I think I would have a hard time imagining that something like this could still happen today. The markets are much more robust than they were, 2.5 decades ago. LMPs, co-optimization with the day-ahead real-time markets. We have commitment requirements, price caps. All of these things are going to make the opportunities to do market manipulation, at least to the extent that Enron was doing, very difficult, I think. Still occurs to some degree, but much much smaller, and the penalties are quite a bit stricter. Yeah, the procurement model with resource adequacy, integrated resource planning, all of this will mitigate that as well. And so Enron, yeah, it is a cautionary tale about having poorly designed market incentives, right? You know, I guess if you were like a free market person, you might be like, yeah, Enron was doing what you would expect a company like that to be doing. They're just taking advantage of a lot of the sort of market signals to do so. One big legacy of the Enron scandal, though, is that a lot of people sort of attribute Enron as to a reason why restructured markets don't work as well as you know, these fully sort of integrated utilities, and many areas decided not to restructure because of what had happened with Enron and worries that the development of a wholesale market for them would lead to manipulation that would, you know, hurt ratepayers. Yeah, I had a professor in grad school who was like very firmly in the like deregulation was a bad thing train. So we got plenty of that perspective from him.
When you have co-optimization of RTO ISO markets, could you sorry if I missed that?
Oh, that was about how the day-ahead market and the real-time market are sort of co-optimized to some degree now, as opposed to being sort of totally separate mechanisms. Yeah. I don't know if co-optimize is necessarily the best language, but the barrier between day-ahead and real-time was eliminated.
It seems like there is kind of a separation though.
I mean, operationally, you can't have them be this. I mean, there's constraints about how they both operate, but like real-time markets are structured in a way that are explicitly based on like deviations from the day-ahead schedules, as opposed to like just trying to deal with frequency as we see it happening. Yeah. Okay. Why don't we do a quick like 3-minute break today? I've got a bit more to get through here. A couple more examples, so we'll keep it short.
Still feel pretty confused about how PPAs work. Maybe I'll learn eventually.
Homework, one of the services that DERs provide is like capacity. Does that mean like reducing kind of capacity constraints for like on the grid or?
Which
It's in
one? Problem 4. So we're talking about which one?
I think it's like B.
Provide 3 distinct pathways in California for DERs to provide grid services. For each include what type of DER is good, what service being provided, energy capacity regulation, emergency response, one constraint or requirement. Okay, so your question is, when I listed capacity, what am I talking about?
Yeah, is that like kind of reducing capacity constraints or like batteries themselves being able to add more capacity?
I think it's more of a compliance thing with like resource adequacy. So because the state has like we don't have the capacity market, right? We have that resource adequacy thing that I'd mentioned. if you have certain types of resources, they can actually count towards resource adequacy constraints. And that counts as like a capacity addition. And we think of like capacity additions as like offering certain types of services. The capacity is there, and they have to be able to be called upon in certain types of events, basically.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. And then when it comes to, I just wanted to understand better the mechanisms behind like overvoltage with solar PVs. I know we were
Okay.
talking about like the regulators boosting it potentially as it gets sent back into the grid. Are there other things that lead to overvoltage?
That's kind of the main one, although I would say the flow of the sudden like push of electricity from the solar does increase the lines a little bit.
Mhm.
So that would be a piece of the voltage increase, but mainly the flow of electrons through the regulators. They don't distinguish the direction of the current. They'll just boost the voltage, and so that's primarily where you're going to have that problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess just in terms of like that being boosted, like if it's coming in at a lower voltage, I think one of the problems it actually has you calculate it, and if
Yeah.
it's coming in at a lower voltage and just gets boosted up to maybe like a higher line voltage,
Yeah.
how is that bad? Is that bad when there's just like a lot of different homes doing that all at the same time?
Yeah. The distribution infrastructure is rated to be able to handle a certain voltage, and it assumes that you're like, oh, we're going downstream, downstream, downstream. We get to put less rigorous protections and stuff that handles voltages at those levels in general, and the regulators, when you have that backflow, can increase the voltage above what a lot of the equipment at that end is meant to handle.
Okay.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of view like the distribution network as like a tank of water that you need to keep at exactly the right level.
Yeah.
If it gets too low, it's bad. If it gets too high, it overflows and stuff gets damaged.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like, all the customers are tapped to the bottom of the tank, and if they have solar power PV up on the roof, that's like their own little hose refilling the water tank.
Yeah, and increasing the pressure at that bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like how they want it to work now is they want everyone to have their own little tanks that they fill with their own hoses first before they fill the big tank.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a decent analogy, I think.
Which I guess kind of explains why like you said that like in NEM 1 people were treating the grid as their battery because
Yeah.
they were.
Yes. Don't look at me. I'm
Is that an awful interpretation to make sense of things?
I think from a physical perspective, yeah, you can kind of think of it that way. But I think the bigger issue with NEM 1 isn't necessarily, I mean, that is a problem that you have to deal with, but the bigger problem I think is more the financial piece.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
well, they're taking advantage of a resource that everyone is paying for, but only they
Yeah.
take advantage of.
Yeah. Again, don't look at me.
You only just found out.
Yes.
I feel like that's,
Yeah. Okay, let's get back into it. So 2003, big Northeast blackout. Anyone experienced this one? Not me, I was in California. You did, so you need,
I mean, I was like pretty young, but
yeah.
yeah, I remember it kind of.
So August 14th, 2003. Yeah, this is kind of crazy. So a 345 kV transmission line, right? So 345 kV, that is that's one of the higher voltage transmissions lines that you can get, right? So that is providing, yeah, a substantial amount of electricity. sagged into overgrown trees and tripped at 3:05. So remember, we have protections against shortage, and so here, those protections essentially trip, which means that they break open the circuit so that that electricity is not all shorting into the ground. You have compounding issues where 3 additional lines also tripped in Ohio due to tree contact over the next hour. I think it was a really windy day or something.
They grew there on purpose.
Yeah, so one of the things you'll notice about some of these big events is that it's not just like one bad thing that happens, right? It's like multiple bad things where you have compounding errors together leading to these disaster events. So alarms and SCADA tools failed in First Energy's control room, which prevented operators from recognizing these conditions. They thought that the balance of load and generation was normal, even though what was actually happening is that the grid was like essentially trying to reconfigure itself with the loss of this transmission. And so if a big transmission line goes down, right, like people are still sucking in electricity, and so the electricity is going to try and find a different path to get to that load. And so the power happens to start flowing on really stressed paths, particularly into like Michigan and then the sort of greater Ontario area. Basically what ends up happening is that all of NISO, portions of MISO, and then Ontario's IESO, which is their operator, basically all ended up losing big transmission paths simultaneously. The operators themselves had very little ability to coordinate because their system's ability to understand what was going on was essentially not available. Okay, and so following this event, you had this like big coordinated black start, which is a difficult thing to deal with, right? You are bringing back power online to a large number of customers, and that's just logistically and physically a hard thing to do. So they basically had to turn on a bunch of hydro fossil plants and resources from New England. And that restoration actually ended up taking something on the order of over a day, depending on where you are. Yeah.
Did any further damage happen as a result of this?
You mean from like the physical infrastructure standpoint? Yeah. So one of the things to note is that actually when you have a blackout, like most of the damage from the blackout isn't necessarily having to do with the like physical assets of your infrastructure. It's actually more of the like loss in productivity associated with like just losing electricity, because you're like affecting millions and millions of people, right? So, you know, some of us, we just, we lose power at home and it's like, okay, great, I get to like sit and read a book or something, right? But, you know, you're talking about...
You didn't have an iPhone back then.
Yeah, that's right. I guess we could, use an iPhone now. But like, we're talking about grocery stores going down and food, losing, refrigeration for food. You're talking about like businesses that lose an entire day of operation.
People with medical devices.
Yeah, hospitals, right? Well, hospitals hopefully would have backup, but medical stuff can be happening. So losing electricity unplanned suddenly to so many people tends to be kind of like the biggest damages.
And-
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, go ahead.
And it's something that you don't hear about much. Like I remember I was an undergrad in Humboldt.
Yeah.
And during the PS shutoffs, we lost power for like 5 or 6 days.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and that's
like,
huge.
They only left like portions of Eureka, like near the because I was in Arcata, which is like just north of Eureka.
Yeah,
And so like your Arcata didn't have any power, and then like only like the hospital and certain like old people's homes.
yep.
Eureka stayed open, but yeah, you don't realize that you can't pump gas.
Yeah, I have a really good colleague in Humboldt, and he was telling me that the grocery stores, like, he said that they were like just giving away like
Yeah,
ice
yeah.
cream and stuff, and because they weren't allowed to sell it anymore.
These like block parties.
Yeah.
Like, grill and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's funny because I mean, that's like longer than like other ones that you hear about. I mean,
Yeah.
this is obviously the scale is a lot bigger, but.
Yeah, so length of time is important, and then impact of number of customers is also, important as well. Yeah.
Just to have barbecues.
This is probably a dumb question, but they have to figure out where it started from and like cut the branches off the trees or something, because it's like, what if they put power back on, but then the lines just sag again and it happens again?
Yeah, absolutely. So you definitely need to figure out the point of failure and why that happened. You are not going to re-energize until you know that won't happen again. Some of we talked about at some of the lower voltages, right? You have these reclosers. If something like hits and shorts, maybe that thing gets blasted into pieces, and then when it recloses again, you're fine, right? Yeah, for like a 300 plus kV line, like you wanna like go there and like make sure that you're not zapping some tree into oblivion and like melting all of the like lines, and yeah.
How fast does it take for them to figure out where it happened? Like, it's just some
I
random-
think I'm not like a maintenance operator or anything. I would imagine you could probably figure out pretty quick. But there's a constraint of like putting a team together, sending them out, and actually doing the physical repair, right? Yeah, like a transmission line repair is like worlds different from repairing a distribution line, right? These things are big. Yeah.
So what, you just have like people dragging along the lines?
Yeah. I mean, if you know generally where it's happening, then you send people out, and then yeah, they could drive along the lines and find.
Nowadays they use drones more and more.
Yeah. But it doesn't take too long at that point, right? Because you could, a lot of these lines have like access roads that are like right next to them, or maybe even
So it's
under
all
them.
power.
Yeah, that's right.
But, I mean, there's some cases where you don't see what caused it.
Yeah.
The state that caused it is no longer present.
That's true. But they'll still like inspect, right? And
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would say so. Like, for example, like a squirrel.
right.
Like, they're like searching for a dead squirrel
Yeah.
on campus. Like, go find
Right.
a dead squirrel on campus.
But like
I guess it's along the line, but
yeah.
the difficulty is that on the grid, on the distribution grid, you may not know exactly where the fall happened.
Yeah, sure.
Unless you have telemetry of some kind, or.
But you'll generally know like
Yeah,
what
like,
section,
circuit went out.
and then you can have someone search that circuit.
Yeah.
But
But-
I have to imagine that for like no squirrel is bringing down a transmission line, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
I'm more talking about distribution.
Yeah.
But Joe just is installing these things that every so often that like, I guess they sense, they like blink for a certain period of time if there was an outage, I think.
Okay.
And then they like, if you have a whole bunch of them along your lines, you can tell based on the blinking.
Oh yeah.
When the last one
Crude
was.
crude telemetry basically. Yeah, yeah.
It's cheap.
And I have to imagine for transmission lines, it's probably worth having better telemetry than what you have on distribution lines.
I would think so.
Yeah.
Well, what if they already have it, like to measure like congestion and everything?
Yeah, exactly. Although some of that you might measure at the substation.
Sure.
But yeah. Anyways, this is the largest blackout in history. So 50 million people, right? That's a lot of people. Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Ontario. The load lost is 61,800 megawatts, right? So that's more capacity than the state of California, right? Essentially. Range from hours to a couple days in some areas, with an economic impact not right in the infrastructure, but having to do with that loss of service, $6 to $10 billion, right? Huh?
Yeah, it's like 61.8 gigawatts.
Yeah.
I think ours is.
So Calofornia, we top out in capacity at about 52-ish gigawatts, I believe.
According to Kelly Kissing.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, six figs, sorry, never mind.
Yeah. So this is about 62 gigawatts. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of power.
Yeah, if you're from the West, you don't realize how dense like population is on the East Coast.
Yeah.
There's-
You've got, I mean, New York City, all of New Jersey, Philadelphia, a large number of major cities, right? New York City itself is just alone, what is the population of New York City, like
I think it's 9 million.
10 million-ish? Yeah, 9 million, yeah. So
When was this?
this was back in 2003. Yeah. This was a blip in the news for me, but I guess.
I don't really, it was for me too. Because it wasn't that long. I mean, especially when you're so young, you don't really think about it.
Yeah, you got better things to do than deal with electricity, right? Yeah, so this led to NERC being mandatory. Imagine that. The NERC was actually voluntary back in the day. So a lot of the guidelines are now sort of mandates. And NERC actually was designated electric reliability organization with a mandatory responsibility of enforcing reliability requirements. Vegetation management standards, that they're codified a bunch of requirements for clearing trees. You can actually, they're doing vegetation management on A Street right now. You guys can go out and see people cutting down trees next to the utility lines. At least they were doing it yesterday. Yeah, and you have to like certain clearance requirements from the lines, reliability coordination, improved SCADA, and then wide area measurement system. So a lot of the latter two having to do with operations and telemetry. But yeah, very big change to the electricity industry in general as a result of this blackout. There is now kind of this continuous data sharing network between different entities. A lot of that had been voluntary before, but now mandatory. And there's a lot more sort of situational awareness in control rooms. And then, as I was mentioning here, coordinators for reliability are integrated into this like continuous data sharing network, where balancing authorities and reliability coordinators all kind of sync up, and then across sort of ISOs, RTOs, up through NERC and FERC. And fortunately, no US blackout of comparable scale has occurred since.
Just waiting for the one lucky solar.
Well, except for what ERCOT stuff, right?
That was not nearly as big as this in terms of number of customers affected. Yeah. I mean, this 50 million people is like more than, it is more than the population of Texas, right? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, you said major, so I see, yeah, took liberty there.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I mean, I guess maybe I'm taking, yeah, of comparable scale in terms of like population affected. Yeah. Okay, I'm sure you guys were all waiting around for this one. California wildfires, another big influential events or set events that continue to kind of shape our electricity industry. And I think most of us here have kind of experienced these in at least some way. So since 2015, so spelling out some of the context here, we've had record-breaking wildfire size, record-breaking wildfire intensity, and then kind of simultaneous across multiple regions. And as you guys, I'm sure, are pretty aware, right, significant interactions with the electricity system. Right, so ignitions, liability, PSPS, grid hardening, all sort of big issues that we've, I think, kind of touched on throughout this course. A lot of the sort of biggest utility, regulatory, and risk management shifts in California have happened, right, in the last like 10 years. Okay. Quick highlight for those kind of recalling. Well, I guess what are the sort of most salient fires? So 2017, we had a bunch of them. Collectively, many, a couple 100,000 acres. Note that the Tubbs fire, we know that came from PG&E electrical equipment. And then you had a number of other sort of smaller size fires happening simultaneously. 2018 was the big Camp Fire, right, that wiped out the town of Paradise. That was later determined to be a transmission line failure, the Caribou-Palermo transmission line. That started this fire in an extremely windy event.
I lived right next to that one.
Yeah,
Scary.
yeah, absolutely.
Did you have to evacuate?
Yes, eventually. There was sort of like just a standing warning for a while, but we decided to get ourselves the hell out of there when like nickel-sized flakes of ash
Which
started
one?
to fall.
Campfire?
Oh yeah, that's why I moved out to California. My family's from Paradise.
Oh.
Yeah, I was in Florida actually.
Yeah, I was
And
going
then I
to
moved here.
Chico State at the time.
I moved here in 2021. My father didn't lose his house, but it was like a construction zone basically.
I deployed for campfire.
Yeah.
All right. So you guys are all, living and breathing this stuff. Yeah, it's interesting. I grew up in SoCal, and there were actually a number of really big wildfires back in the like early mid 2000s that I was affected by. And, we had to evacuate our house, and, we had school closures. I remember because of like fire days, there was like ash in the air. It's interesting.
The sky was orange.
Yeah, it's like Lord of the Rings, Mordor. What's interesting about that is and I think if you guys remember the egg seminar from the guy from Stanford, he talked about this a little bit. Some of that stuff, was related to. It was known then that there was risk coming from electrical equipment and how they would be associated with wildfires, and back then was kind of a chance for utilities to do something, and they didn't, and maybe that puts us in a sort of worse off position, back 10 years ago when a lot of these wildfires started to happen. 2019, slightly milder year, but we did see at least one really big one, almost 100,000 acres, the Kincaid fire. That was also PG&E transmission line. 2020 was a pretty bad year. The lightning complex fires. I don't know if folks remember that one. That was like very fast moving fires that happened after some lightning storms. And it goes on, right? So Dixie Fire, 2021, second largest wildfire in California history, almost 1 million acres. This one led to, also caused by PG&E equipment, distribution line, not transmission line, and actually did lead to pretty big grid impacts. There was transmission outages, and so pockets of load in rural areas, lost power for extended periods of time. McKinney Fire, Mosquito Fire in 2022. 2023, I think not as much, which is good. 2024, and then 2025, we had our big fires in the sort of greater Los Angeles region. Yeah.
What's the largest fire? Maybe 2 slides back.
Oh, yeah.
The largest.
I don't know. Someone could look it up. I think it was probably before a lot of these big fires. Yeah, a lot of the big fires that we were going through are kind of on the order of like 100,000 acres. This is almost 1 million acres, so almost 10 times bigger.
I just wanna, Creek Fire, massive pyroconvective behavior.
Yes.
You can actually drive by the area where that happened. There's just these massive.
Oh yeah, this was the fire tornadoes.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are these massive clearings where you can just see there are big holes where trees used to be, and then 100 feet away there's the tree, root ball and all, just on its side, smashed through several other trees.
Yeah. I mean the sort of the way the fire behaves, it's pretty crazy and hard to predict. I have a very close friend from San Diego in the 2007 or 2008 fire. His next door neighbor's house was burned to the ground, and his house was completely fine. It's great. It's wild.
It says that Wikipedia says that fire, the August complex fire, is the largest.
Yeah, that's the largest.
Which one?
It's in the picture.
Oh, this one here. I thought that one was only the complex fire was only 800,000 acres.
It's shown August complex. I don't know.
Oh, that's a different one. Oh, okay. It didn't even make the slide, guys. But okay, it's up there. Yeah. And what's that? Over 1 million acres? 1 million acres. Yeah. That one is in an area that's a little bit less populated, right? And so okay, so utilities are not responsible for most, actually, of the wildfire ignitions, but disproportionately, they are responsible for the largest and most destructive ones. especially when you have extreme wind conditions. So when we think about wildfire ignitions kind of happening in when you have sort of drier seasons and a lot of vegetation, one of the things that can compound the strength of the fires is like these winds, right? You're essentially adding oxygen in a flow of oxygen, and so that correlates, right, with the same thing that causes the wildfire in the first place with downing like transmission lines. Yeah, so lightning causes about half the ignitions. Non-utility human causes much of the rest, and then the utility electrical equipment is only doing, 5 to 10% of the ignitions, but the ignitions that they're responsible for lead to a disproportionately high share of fatalities, structures destroyed, insurance losses, and then liability exposure. Okay, so California has a strict liability framework. Due to a lawsuit following specifically liability as it relates to the Camp Fire, which was caused by PG&E, they basically were found to be liable for wildfire damages regardless of negligence. And so
individual persons, like negligence.
Yes. So essentially the utility is they're just like wholly responsible, essentially.
For every wildfire or for wildfires caused by them?
For wildfires caused by their
Right.
equipment.
Okay, so regardless of what happened, if that was their fault or not.
Yeah, so you could be like, this operator did something really stupid, it's his fault, it's not our company's fault, or we did the best that we could, we spent $1 trillion on this equipment, and it was an act of God that like triggered this equipment to cause a fire. It doesn't matter. You are liable. So liability claims exceeded $30 billion, and PG&E filed for bankruptcy again in January of 2019. The legislature under AB 1054 created this wildfire fund to help support victims of the wildfire. They have this ratepayer and shareholder-funded insurance backstop, although we heard about the sort of insurance problems, right, because of wildfires and how many insurance companies are now sort of just exiting the market because it's too costly. And then conditioning cost recovery on safety certifications. And so remember when we talk about revenue requirements, rate of return, and rate basing, right? That's all now conditioned on certifying that your equipment is safe to some degree. Okay, PSPS, public safety power shutoffs. We were, just talking about this a little bit, right? So PSPS. So a lot of these examples, right, are about high wind conditions that lead to transmission lines failing, right? You can have vegetation hitting them, or the lines themselves will sag enough at high winds that you have high risk of shortages and those sorts of things. So when you have these high wind conditions and it's also dry, the utility is like, oh, we're responsible for any possible wildfire that's going to happen. let's just turn off the lines to be safe, essentially, right? So this is really a direct sort of response to not necessarily just that the sort of correlation to the wildfire, but to their liability of those damages, right? So now the utility has to be more risk averse to avoid wildfires that could, hurt their bottom line. De-energization is the sort of most immediately available tool that you can do to eliminate risk. So, millions of customers in the sort of peak PSPS years, which is like the 2019 to 2021, basically were forced to lose power. Those outages lasted hours to several days and affected many services, right? And so as we as we kind of discussed, the turning off electricity to people leads to a lot of economic loss as well, right? And so there's this kind of shift from the utility's liability on these wildfire events, and then kind of just them deeming that those losses for the company are worth the trade-off of the sort of economic damages that will happen as you shut off electricity. So, unfortunate consequence of all of this. And we've talked about this, right? So how are they mitigating risk now? We haven't had PSPS or major PSPS events. It still happens, right? But usually in much smaller pockets than what we were going through before. So part of the risk mitigation is undergrounding. And so they're targeting transmission lines in the highest risk areas first, which is one of the reasons why we've had a sort of de-escalation of PSPS. But the aim is for a lot of these utilities to try and underground basically everything. There is this, right, maybe the cynic in me is thinking about that like extra motivation and profit that they get from this, but to some extent, some of this stuff is going to make sense, right? So they want to underground over 10,000 miles of transmission lines. We know that's really expensive to do. It helps to get rid of wildfire ignition risk, reduces PSPS frequency, and then improves the reliability for wind-related outages. But it costs 5 to 10 times more per mile to do. Yeah.
Another thing that I've sort of grappled with, I don't really have an opinion, but just the fact that I think a lot of it comes with direct burial. It's not a conduit. I just don't know what the life cycle ramifications are of that. Probably it's fine.
I didn't know that. It's not in conduit?
I think the vast majority of undergrounding is just like, it's not like in a duct bank like at UC Davis.
Oh, I see what you're saying. It's not like in there isn't like easy access to it, like in these.
No, more like if you dig in the wrong place. Like if you dig at UC Davis, you're gonna hit like I think a concrete encased duct bank.
Yeah.
Direct buried. And it's just like, how do you maintain that? How do you find?
But for a transmission line to run that much, like concrete tunneling, that would be.
I know.
That would make
I
the
just
cost.
it's not. I don't have an opinion. It's just kind of like.
Yeah.
What does that look like in 30 years? Direct buried it. I don't know. I'm just kind of still processing that one.
Yeah, instead you now need underground vegetation management where the roots like grow into it instead.
It's probably fine. probably thought through it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
It's like, it's like,
I don't know too much about the like physical logistics of and characteristics of undergrounding, to be honest. I would hope that they would have thought about
they probably have.
some of this
They probably
stuff.
have.
Yeah. I know that there is that to some degree there's like modularity that you can like you can do maintenance on specific sections. I don't know exactly what that entails, but my understanding is that like
Yeah, okay.
that you can do maintenance on this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the big controversy with undergrounding, right, is about affordability. I think, I think you guys have directly felt the impact of this, right? And one of the big issues from an equity perspective is that a lot of this, so certain corridors are like pretty heavily congested and used, right? But you need transmission lines going out to pretty rural places to provide access to a certain number of customers, probably a smaller number of customers. And so essentially there's this cross subsidization happening where urban customers are essentially subsidizing rural fire risk zones, right? And so a lot of that cost is going to be, these lines going out to low density population areas. And that is, yeah, controversial, right? Should we be subsidizing them and that access? Yeah, and that this is like a very expensive capital assets, and that gets locked into place for many, many years. There are alternative mitigation options that are often cheaper, right? So enhanced vegetation management, predictive shutoff targeting. Yeah. So question, is undergrounding a liability minimization strategy, or is it optimized for reliability? And I would contend that those are not necessarily the same, and that likely the utility is leaning more towards one of those, right, than the other. Yeah, so people have talked about if this kind of mitigation should be funded more like a kind of an insurance mechanism rather than infrastructure that the utility is making a rate of return on. That could alter the decision making of the utility to maybe consider some of these other mitigation options. But as it stands now, right, that infrastructure has a rate of return, and unfortunately there is like a incentive and motivation and justification for the utility to do kind of that expensive option. And we heard this from the wildfire talk, that utilities were like, there was some conversations in the sort of like 2003, 2004 time period where they were like, yeah, look how many wildfires there were. Undergrounding is a success, right? And then we had the LA fires, which actually we later found out was thanks to, well, two of them, I believe, were SCE faulty equipment that led to the ignition of the fires. So yeah, undergrounding will get you so far, but like neither of the LA fires were from transmission lines. Those were like local distribution equipment.
I thought one of them started by somebody.
Yeah, so the one what was the one northeast of Altadena? I'm forgetting the name of that fire. I think that was the one that was caused by a person.
Palisades?
Or do I have it backwards? I think Palisades was equipment and Altadena was the arson one, right? Yeah. Well, you guys can look it up. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Arson.
Which one?
Palisades one was.
Palisades was the arson one. Okay, then you were right. Yeah. Okay. Texas, 2021. Winter storm Uri. It's an extreme cold front across Texas and a lot of central U.S. Temperatures fell below historic norms for many days, and then we had snow, ice, and sustained freezing conditions that affected power, gas, and water. So there's a picture of, is this Houston, I want to say? Yeah. So peak load exceeded 70 gigawatts while available generation collapsed. So 4.5 million customers lost power at its peak, and the outages lasted a couple days. Estimated number of people had died, and economic damages ranging from $80 to $130 billion.
Has anything changed as a result now?
Yeah. And we'll see that. So, natural gas. So this is, I think this picture kind of really spells out how wild this is, right? So usually you want your dotted line, which is the demand, to be serviced by some amount of generation. It can be below, right? If you're like exporting or, if you're like charging storage or something. But look at that demand gap, right? That's people who want electricity and don't get any, essentially. So gas well freezes reduce fuel supply, and so the pipelines that are sending natural gas to our power plants freeze, and they just don't have fuel. Compressor stations lose power, which prevents that fuel from moving through the pipeline. And then those gas-fired plants can't secure fuel, and actually some of their equipment actually freezes as well. Coal plants in Texas, you have these shipments of coal that come in by train, and then they move through these conveyor belts into the plant. So the piles of coal would literally freeze together, and then you can't actually move anything. And it was so cold that like a lot of the boilers had issues actually operating. Even nuclear power plants were tripping due to frozen instrumentation. For wind, you had icing, so ice formation would reduce output at some facilities. Although wind was, I think for the most part, kind of least affected amongst the sort of big generators. Yeah, so you can start to see this happening real time, right? As an operator, you see what your demand load looks like. You're starting to call on generators, and they are reporting back to you, oh, like we're out of fuel, like we can't operate. And so on February 15th, they enter emergency operations. The reserves were like collapsing. So we talked about contingency, right? So our frequency operates at about 60 hertz, and usually your deviations are in the like hundredths place. So they see frequency dropping to 59.3 hertz, which is like very, very in the red. Like that's big time emergency. So what do? You are at a point where you've tried calling all these generators, you can't get people to produce power, so you do the last resort, which is load shed. Because if you don't do that, right, and our frequency falls out of sync, all the power plants are going to get knocked out. So you preserve power to some people, but then you basically roll out this emergency operation to essentially pull the plug from a bunch of people, and ends up lasting a lot longer than a lot of people expected. It was difficult for the generation to recover during the sort of winter storm. Yeah, and so you can see here, generation outage, generation outage, generation outage, generation outage. We get down to almost 59.3, and they're like, we can't recover from this. Turn off people's power, and the frequency will shoot back up as you stabilize the system by turning off load. Yes. So what's the sort of average price per megawatt hour? You're usually on the below $100 a megawatt hour, and they ended up hitting a cap of $10,000. Yeah. Water systems fail due to power loss, which means people are without water, which is very problematic. So natural gas prices spike to $1,000 per MMBTU. Electricity prices hit the market cap $9,000 per megawatt hour for several days, which is pretty intense, right? So instead of, if you were subject to real-time rates, instead of you paying 50 cents a kilowatt hour, that like we do in PG&E, you would be paying $50 a kilowatt hour, right? That would be, very, very, very expensive.
Why is the cap that big?
9,000? I don't think it's a cap. I don't think there is a cap.
That's the maximum you could do.
Is it?
No, I think Texas does have a cap. I think it is 9,000. Yeah. I don't know why it's that high. Yeah.
I thought that's just for the market clear.
Huh?
I thought that's just for the market clear. I didn't know they had a cap.
No. Texas, they definitely had a cap, and it hit that cap and just stayed at the cap for like a couple days. Yeah.
In California, I think it's 1,000.
Yeah.
It's too bad.
2,000? A much more reasonable cap, if you ask me. I don't know why it's set at these levels. Yeah, and so what changed? So they had mandatory weatherization to prevent this from happening. They had critical load designation for gas facilities. Remember that ERCOT doesn't have capacity markets, and so people do point to that a little. Although I've heard some pushback from some friends in Texas. They were like, capacity markets wouldn't have helped in this case, but I don't know. They redesigned some of the ancillary services. They have new reliability products that's layered into their energy-only framework, which is kind of like a Band-Aid for having kind of like having a substitute for some of the what the capacity markets would fix. And so continued debate about that issue. They reformed their board structure and have more, and the Public Utility Commission has a lot more oversight. And so winter reliability is treated as a first order planning problem, but right, they still don't have a full capacity market. They are complying with weatherization, and actually Texas had a pretty intense cold storm recently and did not have the same kind of problems. So reduction in the outage risk, but there's still uncertainty with that fuel supply. And the idea is that the real-time scarcity pricing signals, and maybe this has to do with why the cap is so high, right? If you don't have a capacity market, you can let the energy prices be really high as an incentive, I guess, to bring in some of that capacity, I guess. Yeah, and the other thing is they're isolated, right? ERCOT isn't really able to import much power from the rest of the country, and so they don't have backup that many other regions would have. So that continues to be the case today, and we'll see where it goes.
This was kind of brought in as a case challenge last week for the nuclear class.
Yeah, it is a recent-ish one. Very interesting. Okay, so we're out of time. I actually had one more, but actually I think I'll maybe just take the first like 5 or 10 minutes of next class to cover this one before we do our review, just about data centers. You can imagine it's pretty interesting stuff happening with this. All right, thanks guys. See you guys next